Welcome. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different in during tonight's live stream. Not that different. We've done a couple of these before in the past, a few months ago, and I fell off. I have no idea why. I just sort of did. I apologize for that. I'm resurrecting my Let's Read series, and we're picking up a new book to start with and read through and hopefully learn a thing or two. It's going to be Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order by Patrick M. Wood. Patrick M. Wood is the author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. He studied globalization policies since the 1970s when he partnered with the late Anthony C. Sutton. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. Sutton. That's, by the way, side note, that's the author who wrote the book that we were doing the original Let's Read series on, America's Secret Establishment, an Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones. I have chapters 1 and 2, I believe, done on that one, still on my channel if anyone's interested. Very, very, very insightful read that has been so far. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. He studied globalization policies since the 1970s when he partnered with the late Anthony C. Sutton to co-author Trilaterals over Washington, Volumes 1 and 2. He remains a leading expert on the Trilateral Commission, their policies and achievements in creating their self-proclaimed, quote, new international economic order. An economist by education, a financial analyst and writer by profession, and an American constitutionalist by choice, Wood has deep historical insights into the modern attacks on sovereignty, property rights, and personal freedom. Such attacks are epitomized by the implementation of UN policies such as Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, Smart Growth, and in education, the widespread adoption of Common Core. His current research builds on Trilateral Commission hegemony, focusing on transhumanism, technocracy, and scientism, and how these are co-opting economics, politics, and religion on a global scale. So let's get into this, shall we? In total, this book is about 175, 180 pages, so it's a pretty fairly straightforward read. It's very concise. It's jam-packed with information, so very important information, in my personal opinion. So let's find chapter 1. And here we go. Okay. Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order by Patrick M. Wood. Chapter 1. The Basics of Technocracy. Starting off with a quote here. The scientists have the future in their bones. C.P. Snow. And no, they don't. Patrick M. Wood. By 1932, America had fallen into deep economic depression. During the 3 years since the precipitous stock market crash of 1929, 10,000 banks failed, the economy shrank by 31%, international trade fell by 2/3, and unemployment rose to almost 24%. It should not be surprising that many Americans believed that their national economic system was mortally wounded. Politicians and bankers were widely believed to be responsible. The politicians as corrupt and bumbling fools, and the bankers as malevolent vampire squids. Unfortunately, people also realized how helpless they were to change anything, and this drained whatever hope that they had left. At the same time, the media giant Randolph Hearst was trying to hang on to his flagship, Hearst Communications, that owned no fewer than 30 major newspapers in the largest American cities and many national magazines. At its peak, Hearst Communications was the largest media company in the world. Nevertheless, Hearst was fighting for his very existence by 1932, trying every trick in a publisher's playbook to hold on to readership and advertising revenue. By the early 1930s, Hearst had already developed a reputation for so-called yellow journalism, having, quote, routinely invented sensational stories, faked interviews, run phony pictures, and distorted real events. With the whole world already largely detached from reality, most readers couldn't recognize fake news or wouldn't care even if they did. That news might also be corrupted only that news might also be corrupted only fit in with the larger picture of political corruption, anger, and despair. My apologies. The stage is now set to introduce Nicholas Murray Butler, president of Columbia University in New York. Although both of them were national figures, there was no love lost between Hearst and Butler, who had been attacked by Hearst as an, quote, arch propagandist for un-American principles. Indeed, Butler was the paragon of progressivism in America, while Hearst was just as passionately anti-communist and anti-fascist. Nevertheless, Hearst smelled a big story when Butler announced in early fall of 1932 that Columbia University was backing a brand new economic system being designed by scientists and engineers that could replace capitalism and free enterprise and quite literally rescue the whole world. Since politicians and economists had already failed, why not give the scientists and engineers a shot at it? Even more compelling was the name of this new economic system: Technocracy. Well, this was news, and the Hearst Syndicate wasted no time in jumping in on it. Sorry, I read that wrong. Well, this was news, and the Hearst Syndicate wasted no time in jumping on it. Here was a unique story of something truly new that could restore hope to a hopelessly lost and dying economic system. And most importantly, delivering a hopeful message would certainly build readership, and in fact, it did. The presses ran hot all over America, cranking out story after story on the coming miracle age of the scientific society, if only the scientists and engineers could work out all the details. Many Americans swooned, cheered, and then bought even more newspapers and magazines to stay up to date with the latest developments. While it was true that Hearst had lowered his principles to support anything coming out of Columbia University, his concerns might have been assuaged when he discovered that the technocrats, those scientific and engineering saviors, were also pointedly anti-communist. In fact, an implicit side benefit of technocracy would be to permanently erase communism from America, which undoubtedly helped Hearst's decision to get behind it. Throughout the fall and winter of 1932, Hearst and Butler were seemingly on the same page. However, neither of them realized that they were being conned by the messianic leader of the Technocracy group, Howard Scott. Scott relished the attention he received at Columbia, and he loved to give interviews to any reporter who would listen, most of whom were employed by Hearst newspapers. The bubble suddenly popped when it was discovered that Scott did not have the engineering degree that he claimed to have. In other words, he had pointedly defrauded both Butler and Hearst, and to say that they were both livid is an understatement. Damage control was immediate. Reputation-sensitive Butler, who had put Columbia up to be the laughingstock of global academia, summarily drop-kicked the entire Technocracy group off the Columbia campus. Hearst was no less dramatic, for the purveyor of fake news had been caught at his own game. The guillotine fell swiftly on every Hearst publication in America. Don't ever mention the word technocracy again, or you will be fired. Not surprisingly, no more stories on technocracy appeared in Hearst publications. This could have been the end of technocracy, but it wasn't. Howard Scott's ego was bigger than rejections from Butler or Hearst. Even though he was dead broke by the spring of 1933, he maintained a friendship with one of the earlier technocracy crowd, M. King Hubbard. In fact, Hubbard was generous enough to take Scott in as a roommate, where they continued to discuss ways to get technocracy into the mainstream of American thought. Both were further encouraged by people around the country who had already attached themselves to the technocracy dream. Finally, in early 1934, Scott and Hubbard filed articles of incorporation for Technocracy Inc. in New York State and created a membership organization that would require annual dues to provide operating funds. From this time forward, technocracy as an economic ideology was fleshed out by Technocracy Incorporated, and mostly by M. King Hubbard. The Technocracy study course was published before the end of 1934 and immediately became the touchstone for everything that followed. This 291-page volume was the master architectural document that not only defined technocracy, but also presented details on how to implement it. It was grandiose in scope. Quote, technocracy is dealing with social phenomena in the widest sense of the word. This includes not only actions of human beings, but also everything which directly or indirectly affects their actions. Consequently, the studies of technocracy embrace practically the whole field of science and industry. Biology, climate, natural resources, and industrial equipment all enter into the social picture, end quote. Here we can make the first major observation about technocracy. Society and science are pictured as one, or at least intricately interwoven. This theme has been presented consistently and methodically at every technocracy meeting throughout North America ever since. I apologize for stumbling over some words here. In 1938, their official magazine, The Technocrat, offered the same core belief with some additional clarification. Quote, technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire human population, end quote. Not only did they invent the, quote, science of social engineering, but they intended to impose its methodology on the entire society. Furthermore, the object of the exercise was to produce goods and services to everybody. There is no doubt that technocrats themselves openly declared that technocracy was a replacement economic system for capitalism, and the rest of the technocracy study course explained how it must be implemented and then operated by technocrats consisting of engineers, scientists, and technicians. What commended these technocrats to think that they were able what commended these technocrats to think that they were able to run society better than anyone else, or for that matter, that society would allow or want them to do so? Herein we find the second major observation, and it relates to technocrats themselves. They are an egotistical bunch who have been infected by the ideological poison of scientism. This is a fine point, but one that needs to be understood because it is so very relevant to today's world as well. Early on in the study course, we see the following statement, quote, "Science is, in a dynamic sense, essentially a method of prediction. It has been defined as being the method of the determination of the most probable," end quote. This is a false narrative, but here is where it first originated. The acknowledged philosophical father of both technocracy and scientism was Henry de Saint-Simon, or Simon, who lived 1760 to 1825, who wrote over 100 years earlier, quote, "A scientist, my dear friends, is a man who foresees. It is because science provides the means to predict that it is useful, and the scientists are superior to all other men," end quote. Quote, "A method of prediction," and quote, "science provides the means to predict," are fundamentally identical. They are broad, sweeping statements that can only be understood through the eyes of Saint Simon, or Simon himself, who went on to say that, quote, "scientists are superior to all other men." Thus, this mental superiority complex is exactly where the real trouble with the technocracy began. First, technocrats believed that every problem in society could be answered by science and only science. Second, they believed only they and they alone could devise those answers using the same scientific method used in the hard sciences. Third, they believed that they and they alone must be the ones who actually run society. When I say they, quote, "believed," the proof of this lies in the fact that they consistently assumed the world would naturally bow to them and automatically turn everything over to them. Let me demonstrate. The geographic focus of early technocracy was exclusively on what they called the North American Technate. Their official map included Greenland, all of Canada, Alaska, the continental United States, Mexico, Cuba, all of Central America, and the few northernmost countries of South America. It was assumed that somehow this entire geographic region would adopt technocracy as its economic system and would allow the scientists and engineers to control the whole thing. What is totally missing from all of their literature, and I have searched thoroughly, is any explanation or rationale on how to convince these sovereign nations and their people to roll over into technocracy. It just never occurred to the technocrats that anyone would resist them. In other words, if science is fact and facts have the last word, then who would have anything else to say? This is the same siren call of scientism that persists to this very day, and we see these same attitudes in all the modern aspects of technocracy, such as Sustainable Development Agenda 21, 2030 Agenda, biodiversity, global warming, alternative energy, etc. In every case, the quote science is presented as quote settled, with the implicit assumption that nobody has a reason to dispute either the science or the remedial actions that are specified to fix some perceived problem. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a technocrat, scientist, or engineer, everything looks like a problem begging for a scientific or engineering solution. It is important to make a distinction between real scientists and engineers versus their technocratic counterparts. The latter have been infected with some degree of scientism, while the former have not. The world is full of legitimate scientists and engineers who just want to practice their craft and be otherwise left alone. They contribute greatly to the service of mankind. They have no desire to run the world or tell everyone else what they must or must not do. They are not into falsifying or misusing data to fit unprovable theories, and most of all, they are not interested in using their technologies to control people. To these, we salute. This portion is called the Technocracy Architecture, still in Chapter 1. Technocracy is a resource-based economic system that uses energy as its accounting system. This is in contrast to our current economic system, which is price-based, i.e. supply and demand, and uses money as its accounting system. In a resource-based economic system, all resource inputs required for human subsistence would be carefully measured and meted out in the most efficient manner in order to eliminate wastage. All consumption would be automatically limited by issuing to all citizens a quota of energy certificates. These certificates could be spent on goods and services priced according to the energy that it took to make them in the first place. This, they reasoned, would create a utopia-like society where people would only work 20 hours per week and yet still have abundance of material goods available for consumption. Extensive details of the mechanics, details, and rationale of technocracy can be found in the Technocracy study course and in this author's book, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. In the interest of space, I will list a few of the more salient features in this section. The official requirements for technocracy are seen on page 232 of the study course and were considered necessary for normal operation of the technate. 1. Register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. 2. By means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. 3. Provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. 4. Provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services, where produced and where used. 5. Provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. 6. Allow the citizen the widest latitude of choice in consuming his or her individual share of continental physical wealth. 7. Distribute goods and services to every member of the population. In items 1 and 2, you can see the focus on control over energy distribution and consumption. Items 3 to 5 cover the extensive collection of data that would be used to monitor and control the societal machinery. Item 6 indicates that citizens could buy anything they wanted, limited only by the number of energy certificates that were issued at the beginning of the accounting period. Item 7 points out that every single member of society would be in the system, with no possibility of holdouts. Other key points to the original definition of technocracy include private property would be eradicated altogether. Private property would be eradicated altogether. I had to read that again because that's kind of important. People should pay very, very close attention to that objective and everything else, really. Everything would be owned in common by the technate and controlled by them. Sounds a lot like state communism, doesn't it? Just throwing that out there. All price-based currencies would be abolished and replaced by a system of energy certificates. Energy certificates would be issued at the start of an accounting period and expired at the end of it, preventing accumulation of savings for future needs. All conceivable human needs, food, housing, transportation, medical, retirement, etc., would be met by the technate at their sole discretion. Traditional systems of government would be abolished, including Congress and state governments. A continental board of technocrats would manage all economic and societal affairs according to functional and service sequences defined by and run by themselves. Education would be transformed into human conditioning to prepare students for a lifetime of work chosen for them by the technate. Science and the scientific method would be the sole guide to decision-making throughout the technate, based on collected data. A little side note here. Every time we see the word technate now, I'm just going to say technocratic state. Because that's starting to trip me up a little bit in my head. Moving forward, though. Because private ownership of any resource was deemed wasteful and inefficient, technocracy specified that all automobiles would be converted into public assets. Ride-sharing would become the new norm. Quote, this would be accomplished by instituting what would resemble a national drive-it-yourself system. The automotive branch of transportation would provide a network of garages at convenient places all over the country from which automobiles could be had at any hour of the night or day. No automobiles would be privately owned. When one wished to use an automobile, he would merely call at the garage, present his driver's license, and a car of the type needed would be assigned to him. When he was through with the car, he would return it either to the same garage or to any other garage that happened to be convenient, and surrender his energy certificates in payment for the cost incurred while he was using it, end quote. If you have any understanding of modern initiatives like Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, the 2030 Agenda, global warming, etc., you should immediately see some striking parallels to historic technocracy. Don't be tempted to write it off as coincidental, because I promise you it is not. In all of its original self-conceived glory, technocracy is alive and well today, but don't let anyone suggest to you that it is a modern idea cooked up by the United Nations, NGOs, economic planners, or even the Trilateral Commission. It was not. One of the keenest insights into technocracy was offered by Aldous Huxley in 1932 at the exact same time that Nicholas Murray Butler and Randolph Hearst were crowing about the economic miracle being conceived at Columbia University. Huxley didn't have to look twice to see that the outcome of technocracy would be scientific dictatorship. The title of this book was Brave New World. And that is the end of chapter 1 of Technocracy, the Hard Road to World Order by Patrick M. Wood. Very, very interesting. So, I myself have read through most of the Agenda 21 documentation that's available for public consumption on the UN's website. And so learning about technocracy, especially for the past 3 years or so, I know exactly what this author is talking about, and I know exactly where this is going. It just fits. It fits the mold that I already had in my head. So there's not a whole lot of new information being portrayed to me in this book so far. It's more so a cementing of what I already thought and knew about prior to reading it. However, he does get more into the specifics, which is good, because the more information, the more finer details that get fleshed out, the better. Because I like to have a more holistic view on matters in general. So I'm enjoying that aspect of it for sure. Anyway, we're going to stop here, and we'll read chapter 2 probably tomorrow or tomorrow night at some point, if I have the time. Hopefully you guys have learned something useful. Or maybe you're being introduced to this topic for the first time, in which case I hope this has motivated you to look further into it and grasp the implications of such a global socioeconomic system, and just how serious it is, and how detrimental it would be to our world and society as a whole. But either way, I hope everyone who has tuned in or will tune in enjoys and takes a valuable takeaway from this. All right, that's going to do it for me for now. I am off to make some food because I'm starving. All right, I'm outie. Deuces.